I just wanted to say good morning to everybody. My name's Wendy Fenton, and I'm the coordinator of the Humanitarian Practice Network here at ODI. And I'd like to welcome all of you in the room, as well as the 300 people that have signed up to watch online today. And today's event launches the revised Good Practice Review 9 on disaster risk reduction. It was first published in 2004, and with its wide range of coverage and operational focus, the GPR 9, as we like to call it, filled a major gap which wasn't addressed by other guidance and resources. And over 10 years after it was first published, it remains one of HPN's most popular resources. However, much has changed and been achieved in disaster risk reduction since 2004, and with the expiry of the Hyogo 2 and the prospect of the new Sendai framework, we thought it was also time to revise the GPR 9. So the revised version brings the guidance up to date by incorporating new evidence, case studies, and thinking on DRR, which we'll be reflecting on today in the context of the April 2015 earthquake in Nepal. This earthquake, as you all know, caused the deaths of over 8,000 people, injured 22,000, and destroyed or damaged an estimated 850,000 buildings. Now, given the advances in technology, and because we wanted to make the revised GPR 9 more user-friendly, we've created a dedicated microsite online. And the site address is goodpracticereview.org/DRR, and I think it will appear on the screen as well at various points. Now, this enables you to read the whole GPR online in a reader-friendly format, unlike the previous version, which was not in a reader-friendly format, I have to say. And you can download the book or individual chapters easily, and you can watch a whiteboard animation on 10 things you should know about DRR. We're in the process of commissioning several short case study films for the site, too, the first of which will be shown this morning. Hard copies of the book will also be available on request early next week. The GPR revision, I have to say, has been generously funded by DFID, GIZ, and the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and guidance and support were provided enthusiastically by our steering group that we convened around it. And I know many, many other DRR experts, people working in DRR, have contributed as well directly through John. So before I introduce our distinguished panels, both in London and Kathmandu, can I ask you please to put your phones on silent, but feel free to tweet using the event hashtag DRR. And in the event of a fire alarm, please leave the room, turn right this way, go past reception and exit the building. So thank you very much. Now, I'd like to introduce the panel. And on my left, first of all, is Dr. John Twigg, who I think most, if not all of you know. John is the author of the original Good Practice Review 9 and the revised version that we're launching today. He's a senior research associate at University College London. He's worked in the international NGO sector and carried out consultancies for a range of organizations, including ActionAid, the United Nations Development Programme, the British Red Cross, and Oxfam. And on John's left is Elizabeth Drew. Elizabeth is the head of international institutions at International Alert. Before this, she was Alert's country director in Nepal, and she spent nearly 3 years in Nepal working on conflict prevention with UNDP prior to joining Alert. Liz has had 10 years of peacebuilding experience, having also worked with DFID, Conciliation Resources, and a Sudanese NGO, Sudia. And then last but not least, on my right, in London anyway, is Bruno Hegbert, and he's the learning coordinator at the Global Network of Civil Society Organizations for Disaster Reduction, GNDR, otherwise known as. And he was previously the senior officer at Prevention Consortium and DRR Climate Change Adaptation Advisor for the Netherlands Red Cross. Bruno was closely involved in setting up the Partners for Resilience Alliance as well. Now I did it again. I've cautioned everyone not to knock the microphone, and I've done it now. But moving on to our panel in Kathmandu, we're very, very happy to have with us Jamie McGoldrick, who is the UN resident coordinator and resident representative in Nepal. Immediately prior to coming to Nepal, Jamie was the resident coordinator in Georgia. Over his career, he's also worked with the International Federation of the Red Cross, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and Save the Children. So welcome, Jamie. We're very happy that you could join us today. And I'm not sure who we have. Ahmad?
You have Ahmad Dixit. Yes.
Right. Ahmad, welcome. I'm sorry. I haven't met you before, Dr. Pokharel, so I wasn't quite sure. Ahmad is the Executive Director of the National Society for Earthquake Technology, otherwise known as NSET. And he founded this in 1994. And Ahmad is a member of the governing board of the Global Earthquake Model and sits on the management board of the Asian Disaster Reduction and Response Network, ADRRN, which he also co-founded. So we're very pleased that you could join us today, Ahmad, and we appreciate your hospitality to our film crew as well. Thank you very much. And then I think we're expecting Dr. Govind Raj Pokharel as well, who is on his way.
Yes, he's on his way. He's stuck in traffic. There's a big festival today in town. It's caused a traffic jam, so he'll be here shortly.
Thank you very much. I'll just say a few words about him even before he joins us, but Dr. Pokharel is the Vice President of the National Planning Commission in Nepal, and he has over 10 years of direct management experience as an executive director of various government institutions and NGOs. He was professor at the Industrial and Mechanical Engineering Department of the Institute of Engineering at Tribhuvan University, Nepal. So welcome to all of our panelists. Now, we've got quite a few speakers. We want to allow as much time as we can for questions and answers at the end, so we're hoping that everyone will keep to the very short amounts of time that we've allotted them. I'm going to start off with John. I'm going to ask him to say a bit about the GPR. John?
Okay. Thank you, Andy. It's just over 10 years since the first edition of the book was published. Inevitably, the field has moved on considerably in that time. And the book reflects that. There was an enormous volume of information to sift this time. Big contrast to 2003-04 when I was writing the first edition. Then I was scrabbling around trying to find relevant information of any kind on a lot of subjects. Now there's an abundance of it. So I had the reverse problem. I had information surfeit. Trying to synthesize that down into a book that is still roughly the same length as the previous edition was quite a challenge. But what was also interesting was not just the volume and the range of the material agencies were producing, but their willingness to share it, which hasn't always been the case in the past. And people were flinging stuff at me, some of which was useful, I'm pleased to say. What I'd like to do in the next few minutes is really say what I think the book shows about the progress of DRR globally in the last decade. And particularly I'm going to accentuate the positive. I'm going to look at the positive aspects of progress. I'm sure there are lots of caveats that you can all think of, and maybe we'll discuss those a bit later on. The obvious caveat being, of course, that for all the progress we've made, DRR remains a pretty marginal, in some cases even peripheral issue on what's already a very crowded and contested public policy agenda. So let's have a look at some of what I think some of the sort of significant advances are. I think we see much greater commitment by agencies of all kinds, multilaterals, governments, civil society, etc., in DRR, and generally, right across the board, a rising level of interest and engagement. We've seen DRR become gradually more mainstreamed into broader policy and practice. And we're starting to see a shared discourse emerging that links DRR, climate change adaptation, resilience nowadays, and sustainable development. And that wasn't there. It was still much more siloed 10 years ago. And this isn't just happening at the policy level. We're starting to see moves towards more integrated approaches to programming too. And agencies are starting to adopt the same or similar concepts, terminologies, policies, planning methodologies, and operational tools. This is all very encouraging. We're seeing progress particularly at national level in the form of new laws and policies, and in some cases institutional and planning reforms. We're seeing advances in the development particularly of hazard, vulnerability and risk analysis tools and their use, their application by planners and operational agencies alike. And we've seen ongoing advances in the scientific understanding of natural hazards and the development of monitoring technologies. Early warning preparedness and response systems are greatly improved over the last 10 years and over the last 20 years, and they're now, in many cases, highly effective in saving lives. Interestingly, we're starting to see more emphasis being placed on what's called the co-production of knowledge about risk or different aspects of risk by scientists, practitioners, communities of all kinds, and with that, a better appreciation of the merits of local knowledge. I'm not sure how widespread that better appreciation has got yet, but it's growing. It's starting to appear. And of course, we've seen the ICT revolution, which is revolutionising DRR as well, particularly data collection, risk and vulnerability assessments, forecasts and warnings, communications, response coordination. Whereas 10 years ago, a lot of agencies still took a very technocratic approach to DRR, nowadays I think it's fair to say that most agencies working in that field recognise the importance of reducing vulnerability and at least pay attention to, if not focus upon, marginalised people in their programmes. And associated with that is the much greater adoption and promotion of community-based disaster risk management in all its forms around the world. We're also seeing better linkages between DRR, poverty, sustainable development, social protection and livelihoods. There's been a lot of incorporation of sustainable livelihood support, promotion and protection into DRR programming. And we're starting to see that link with wider issues of social protection, social safety nets and so on. Associated with that has been an expansion in the range of financial services and instruments that are available that can be applied to DRR. And microfinance institutions and microinsurance are increasingly important in this. We've seen a growth in the number of national, regional and international networks involving both NGOs and researchers, and this has been a really powerful platform for DRR advocacy on both policy and practical issues. I think the gradual emergence of more standardised or more common DRR implementation and monitoring frameworks is giving us an opportunity to develop greater coherence, professionalism, and also maybe greater accountability. I think that's been a significant shift since the Hyogo framework. The significance of urban risk and urban risk reduction is being recognised. It's always been recognised, I suppose, but there's much more effort now going into thinking about how to do DRR effectively in complex urban systems and how to mitigate urban crises. And more attention is being paid to the influence of social crisis and conflict on DRR. There's a growing body of experience of implementing DRR in insecure regions by tackling quite a range of interconnected social, environmental and political threats. There's greater commitment to better monitoring and evaluation in DRR. The range of approaches, methods and tools has expanded enormously, and many agencies have developed more generic criteria in monitoring and indicator frameworks, although I will put in a caveat here, which is that evaluation is still grossly under-resourced in most cases. And we're starting to see cost-benefit analysis being used in local-level initiatives. Formerly, it was just used on the big infrastructure programs. Now it's starting to find its way into more grassroots work as well. And finally, and I don't think I did mention this in the book, but it's something that's occurred to me more and more as we've gone along. I think one of the most significant developments in DRR is one of the least visible. And that's the massive growth in the number of people who've been trained and educated in the theory and practice of DRR in all its various aspects. They're going to be the managers and leaders of this movement, if I can call it that, in the future. And I think that's probably the most significant issue we need to think about, is capacity building. It's not necessarily about tools and frameworks and all that kit, although they're important. It's about the human and institutional capacities to do the job. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. Before we move to our speakers in Nepal, we wanted to set the scene with a case study video that we recently had filmed. I think Tim might be here, actually, the filmmaker, just over here. So he visited Nepal only a couple of weeks ago and was hosted by NCET. The film showcases some of NCET's community-based disaster risk management work with a women's group in Thangkot, specifically focusing on go bags. Can we show that film?
In April 2015, Nepal was devastated by an earthquake that killed over 8,000 people and left over 2 million homeless. In Thankot, the National Society for Earthquake Technology, or NSET, supports community-based disaster risk reduction initiatives as part of a wider program to make Nepal earthquake safe.
भूकम्प आउन साथ चाहिँ के गर्यो भने एकजना बच्चा मात्र मसँग थियो एकजना बाहिर खेलिरहेको थियो अनि त्यो बच्चा खोज्ने ध्यान भयो कि मलाई चाहिँ एकदम बच्चा कहाँ गयो होला अनि अहिले चाहिँ भूकम्प आइसकेपछि चाहिँ 1 महिना त्यहाँ बाहिरै बसेँ कोट घरमै यो पुरुषहरू नहुनुमा चाहिँ अब प्राय घरको काम सबै महिलाले नै गर्ने भयो अनि यो सबै सामानहरू सच्याएर राख्ने पनि महिलाले नै भयो त्यही भएर पनि
एनसेटले चाहिँ हामीलाई 2 वर्ष अगाडि यो मतलब चाहिँ हाम्रो ठानकोट महिला जन सहकारीका मेम्बरहरूलाई चाहिँ एउटा तालिम दिइसकेपछि चाहिँ गो ब्याक भन्ने कुरा बुझ्यौँ हामीले बुझिसकेपछि चाहिँ यो गो ब्याकलाई कसरी प्रयोग गर्नुपर्छ भन्ने कुरा त्यो तालिमले नै हामी सिक्यौँ त्यसले गर्दा चाहिँ हामीले बनाउन प्रोत्साहन भयो अनि अर्को हस्पिटलको महत्त्वपूर्ण कागजहरू हामी हस्पिटल जानको एउटा पर्छ यो हस्पिटलको कागज अनि बिक्री गरेपछि हामीलाई त्यसबाट आम्दानी पनि भयो त्यसले पनि हामीलाई प्रोत्साहन मिल्यो यो एउटा गो ब्याग एउटा चाहिँ आम्दानीको स्रोत पनि बन्ने रहेछ भन्ने कुरा पनि सिकेँ
Go bags contain essential emergency supplies to help people survive during a crisis. People were initially unsure about the need for go bags because they were more focused on everyday hazards rather than preparing for a large-scale disaster.
पहिला यो तालिम लिएर चाहिँ हामीले घर दैलो कार्यक्रम गरेको थियौँ घर दैलोमा हामी घरमै गएको थियौँ 1835 घर धुरीमा चाहिँ हामीले घर दैलो गरेर कुरा थियो अनि अरूले चाहिँ यस्तो गो ब्याग चाहिँदैन भनेर थाहा अहिले चाहिँ भूकम्प गएपछि चाहिँ उहाँहरूले यस्तो चाहिने रहेछ हामी पनि उ गर्छु भन्ने पनि छन् कि त्यही भएर
यहाँ त महिनौँ दिनसम्म चाहिँ भूकम्प आएकोले गर्दा हामीले त्यो जुन ब्यागमा राखेको सामानहरूलाई प्रयोग गरेँ राति पनि पानी पर्दा हामीले रेनकोट प्रयोग गर्न पाएँ त्यसमा राखेको औषधिहरू चाहिँ हाम्रो समुदायले नै प्रयोग गर्न पाएँ त्यस्तै गरी खानेकुराहरू
यो ब्याग बोकेर आउँदा चाहिँ पहिला सुरुमा त पानीमा क्लोरिन राख्न उपयोग भयो अनि टाउको दुखेकोहरूलाई सिटामोल अनि घाउ भएको बच्चाहरू पनि थियो उनीहरूलाई टेप लगाइदिएँ
Disaster risk reduction initiatives can help communities self-organize, identify the most vulnerable, and better communicate with local authorities. This can help communities manage a wide range of disasters, not just earthquakes. Ultimately, local people are the first responders when disasters strike, and investing in local preparedness means they can better cope in a crisis.
We just, as I said, wanted to set the scene. This video will appear on the microsite as well. And now, if we can move back to Kathmandu. There you are.
Yeah.
And Jamie, I'd like to bring you in now, and it would be wonderful if you could briefly outline the pre- and post-earthquake context in Nepal, and maybe talk about some of the collective action and challenges of scaling up.
Okay, thanks a lot, Wendy. Thanks, John, Elizabeth, and Bruno. It's good to be here. I've got one member of the panel with me, Ahmad, and Dr. Pokharel's on his way. We're very fortunate to have these guys with us today. I just want to say also for John, I brought 2 books with me to Nepal. One was an Undak assessment book, and the other one was John's own book on risk reduction, because I knew I was coming to Nepal. Anyway, as John says in his very excellent outline of the new book, there's been a lot of changes in the DRR globally, and I think that Nepal has been one of the countries that's made substantial progress in this regard. raising awareness on DRR at the same time, individual programs and projects that have been established here. The programs have had demonstrated results, and we saw that in the earthquake. Hospital safety, building code development, endorsement with good progress in developing a 20-year action plan on implementation of the building code, the search and rescue, identification of open spaces, and I think the support to pre-positioning humanitarian staging areas in the event of a disaster, early warning systems on floods, and the reinforcements of river embankments. I think also to highlight the community-based work as well, the DRM at community-based. We had a big plan to roll out a quarter of the population by 2016, but then the earthquake came, so that's our excuse for not completing that, but we'll get back on it again. But so I think in Nepal there's two stories we can tell. One is a positive story of progress, and the other one is a much more complex and context-specific one. The latter more truly reflects the challenges in trying to scale up and trying to ensure a truly effective and mainstream DRR in the country and places like Nepal. I think the classic disaster management approaches maybe are no longer applicable here, and risk assessment and management needs to be much more embedded and mainstream deeper into all the sectors and across sectors. I think when the global realities are applied in places like Nepal, across ministries and agencies, the SDGs and the Sendais and the climate change protocols, they're all competing with a lot of other issues out there for focus. And I think funding and also trying the collective added value is not quite there yet. So we've got work to do on that. I mean, on the reality that's here, despite the real progress, I mean, Nepal is a country which every year will request agency support, even for the smallest emergency. And despite all the capacity building and the systems, that still is the case here. As was mentioned by Wendy, we experienced major disasters, transformative earthquakes that took place on 25th April and 12th May, and another 400 aftershocks over 4.0 magnitude in that time since. And just to give you a context, at the same time, Nepal is in the last 3 years has had 3 different governments, an interim government, and now on the weekend there, the second of a regular government. So there's been a lot of flux, and it's been very difficult then to have your attempt to try and have the traction required to make the changes that are needed. And even this morning, I chaired a humanitarian country team meeting. We're actually focusing on winterization. I mean, right now, 6 months after the disaster, we should be focusing on reconstruction. But because of all of the changes and the complexities I just mentioned, we haven't moved the agenda in that direction yet. And I think at the same time, it's a country that's it's a least developed country, and it's landlocked. It's hostage to fortune between its neighbours. And when you have supply chain breaks like fuel or essential commodities like gas or the usual stuff needed to keep countries going, if you have a break in that for any 2-week period, the country comes to a standstill. And we've seen massive queues for petrol. The whole city is locked down on this. People can't plan accordingly, and the whole contingency planning required is not there. So I think that the uncertainty is there, and where also the context where disaster risk management, as opposed to immediate response, has not yet been institutionalized in legislation. While the disaster reduction law is there and the protocols are out there, they've not been enshrined in the law here. And I think that while we need to have a substantial change in the way DRR is done in this country and resilience, it requires strong, a connection between accountability and governance, and as the review points out. But I think at the same time, we have to be better placed to inform and advocate for that change. So I'll leave it there just now because I know my time is up. So over to you, Wendy.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Those are some really excellent points. Ahmad, we're really interested to hear from you. And I guess it would be interesting to hear a little bit from you about what NSUD is doing, but also what you see as the key vulnerabilities and risks in Nepal in relation to that.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's well known that Nepal, it faces a multitude of natural hazards, and the corresponding risk is very high. The vulnerabilities lies across sectors. The people are vulnerable, the buildings are vulnerable, and given the fact that most of the buildings, the majority of them are non-engineered one, even in Kathmandu, forget about the rural areas, the infrastructures are vulnerable, and the monuments are vulnerable. So the vulnerability is all spread around. It is very high, and we can talk a lot about that. The social vulnerability and the rigidity of the mindset, especially the higher up you go, the more rigid it becomes. But I think that I still would like to say that over the past 22 years, we are very happy that, even in such a weak economy country, a very highly vulnerable country, there have been several cases which are fundamental and they have made a big difference. Be it your assessment of the risk, for example, the Kathmandu Valley risk assessment with respect to earthquakes, or the resulting action planning and the implementation of the action plan, be it raising awareness or the annual earthquake safety day, or use of ICT and the FM radios, the building code implementation, school building retrofitting, and the school earthquake safety program, the capacity building, training of masons, and the working with the community. So what I say that the social, technical, economic, political feasibilities of risk reduction, the cost effectiveness of risk reduction, that have been demonstrated here. The corresponding methodology have been developed and implemented. For example, the per child cost for a school earthquake safety program is about less than $50, and that is we are very proud of that. But then the problem is that these all stories, they are isolated cases, they are islands of successes, and it becomes very painful to see that while we have done about 300 schools in Nepal, it's a combined efforts of everybody, 300 schools as against about 60,000 schools that need retrofitting, and how to go to that 60,000 figure. That is the question of, the problem is there, and it does require the question of, it does require a good policy environment, the regulation, and the enhanced accountability. And in that field also, Jamie was talking about, the policy environment. We have got excellent building code, but the implementation is problem. We developed, in 2009, we developed the National Strategy for Disaster Risk Management, which is a sort of a Nepal version of the Hyogo Framework of Action, and more, actually incorporates many of our experiences since long. But then, it is not implemented fully, and the bill, the Jamie was just talking about, that is still in limbo, and still we are afraid that still it may come out as a response-centric bill. Still it might be, not very specific about the accountability and the responsibility distribution among various stakeholders. So, in that background, what we see that, what has worked here in Nepal is definitely the community-based disaster risk management approaches. I would say that most of the work that NSET has done, it has got either it is mostly community-based, be it school earthquake safety program. We work with the community, be it the go back with the women folks in Thankot and Lalitpur. So it is either CBDRM or close to CBDRM. What we see is also in preparedness is, go back is one example, but there are, at the village level, the government has initiated the village level local disaster risk management planning process and the district level planning process. What we see that whenever you are working at the community level, it works. Otherwise, it becomes again ritual and official and very formal, and it doesn't work so much. I stop there. I think I have so much of things to say, but I'll just my question answers.
No, thank you very much, Ahmad. And we will have a question and answer session, so I'm sure there will be several people who want to engage you on that. Jamie, did you want to come back in?
I just wanted to say that we've just been informed that Dr. Pockerell can't make it. He's stuck in high-level meetings right now as part of the Reconstruction Authority.
Sure. No, that's fine. Thank you very much for letting us know. What we'll do then is we'll now move to Elizabeth Drew. And we thought it would be very interesting to hear from Elizabeth because, as John was saying earlier, much more attention is being focused around issues related to social crisis and conflict. And we thought Liz would be very well placed to give us some insights on that based on her time in Nepal and her focus on conflict and peace building.
Thanks,
Elizabeth?
Wendy. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I guess as Jamie and Ahmad touched on, politics is really sort of central to the challenge really of both DRR and recovery in Nepal. And I kind of want to talk a bit about the intersection really between conflict and disasters, which John's book sort of very eloquently elaborates. It's a complex field, and it's sort of, I think, one of the more underdeveloped linkages in this area. In terms of Nepal's context, I mean, we heard about the devastating impact of the earthquake, but prior to that, it had experienced a 10-year armed conflict between 1996 and 2006, and that left devastating impacts too. More than 14,000 people killed, thousands displaced and injured, and so on. And it was really a product of kind of long-standing, deep-set structural inequalities and grievances and sort of marginalisation based on identity. There's a very sort of deep-set caste system, high levels of gender inequality, ethnic and religious marginalisation. So, Maoism, which was the sort of vehicle for these grievances, kind of took force. And I think, the peace process that's ensued has made great steps in on certain levels, but these issues will take sort of years to rectify. And you can really see the social stratification and the issues and the legacy at the local level as well as the national political level. So in terms of governance, the political transition has had a big impact on what's been possible to achieve in terms of disaster risk reduction. There's recently been a constitution promulgated, but there's been years of wrangling over that, and the interim parliaments basically have really not had the political appetite for legislation on these issues. So a disaster preparedness act was pending for some 8 years. And I think we can sort of see that now as well with the focus on the constitution, which is an important political step, but detracting emphasis away from setting up the National Reconstruction Authority, which is needed to implement the recovery and spend the internationally pledged assistance. And locally, there are sort of social divisions that hamper both preparedness and response. You have community-based DRR has made great strides, but I think, when we zoom in locally, these committees, can be politicized, and in the interim where there's been a great kind of vacuum of accountability post-war, there haven't been local elections for some 18 years. So people, are in that vacuum, their political strongmen have kind of really built up sort of their constituencies. There's a lot of patronage politics, there's corruption. And so when you get a lot of resources injected into that context in terms of a humanitarian response, inevitably there's co-option of resources and there's conflict that's generated around that. And vulnerable people are left out, like single women, disabled people, lower caste people, as it were. So those challenges. And I think in terms of sort of responding to that, there does need to be much more cognizance of the conflict sort of dynamics and the peace-building needs in terms of kind of building resilience and building back better, if you like. I think at the sort of the governance level, there needs to be a sort of much more inclusive and accountable approach to both national and local governance, and in terms of how the recovery is structured. I think participation and participatory approaches, which your chapter on this, John, really highlights, it will be key to bring in those marginalised people that don't always get to participate in these processes. Providing reconstruction processes could provide opportunities for more marginalised people and women and so forth to really assume roles and earn income and gain new status by sort of participating in the design and construction of new buildings. I think there's great potential for dialogue with local government between people in terms of boosting citizen oversight of resources injected locally. And I think overall the humanitarian system and the DRR sector really needs to increase its cognizance of of conflict sort of dynamics and peace-building approaches in terms of boosting accountability in citizen-state relations. And, I'd say witnessing the sort of rollout of the humanitarian response, there is a dearth of understanding and technical capacity within the humanitarian system to grasp these issues. We provided support to the shelter cluster to sort of understand local conflict dynamics and so on, and to build that in the balance between sort of blanket versus targeted support, these kinds of dilemmas that arise. So, more of that drawing on local capacity on these topics, but also building in systemically to roll that out, I think will be important. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Now moving over to Bruno, last but not least. Now, Bruno, you're going to maybe build on what others have said and talk a bit more depth about some of the issues around community-based disaster risk management.
Yes, thank you, Wendy. As Ahmad, I think, clearly highlighted, there's a strong value of community-based disaster risk management, but also a need for the government to recognize and invest in it more actively. I'm working for the global network of civil society organizations for DR. We have around 1,000 members, mainly in the global south, in over 100 countries, and NCET is one of our key members in Nepal. Our director, Marcus Oxley, who many of you know, was recently in Nepal and also visited some of the work NCET is doing. I think the film clearly showed the value of working with communities and how people could be made better prepared and how community resilience could be strengthened. But the film also showed that there's some challenges in doing that, and that it's not a straightforward process. When NCET, before the earthquake, tried to convince people to engage in preparedness work, there was a high degree of skepticism. People say, why do we need these drills? Why do we need these evacuation exercises? What are these go-backs for? Why do we need fire training? We've not experienced any earthquake since 1934. There was no collective memory of the earthquake. So it was a hard job to convince them. Also, when NCET was engaged in some of the retrofitting work of school buildings, a lot of local authorities, but also households were saying, you're just installing fear and panic. You just want to get some more funding for your programs because retrofitting costs about 20% high. So there was a lot of reluctance, even at the community level, to engage in CBDRM. And everything changed clearly during and after the earthquake. And the attitudes and the mindsets of both the communities, but also the local authorities and the NGOs changed. It was clear that those communities that had been trained in CBDRM were able to self-organize, identify who was vulnerable, who needed support, and with whom to connect with from the local government. If the training had not happened, it would have been far more chaotic, so especially at the local level. And the video clearly shows that women were enthused by the CDRM work. They were immediately on the ground, they were doing household surveys, starting family tracing, and connecting with local authorities. They prepared reports and they made lists of people who needed urgent support. So I think overall it was a positive image what CBDRM managed to accomplish, but when they started linking with the government, often the government questioned the validity of these community-based initiatives. As they said, they were not part of the formal normative government structure. It didn't fit into the normal way the government functioned. But NCET clearly stressed that when resources are scarce, it is important to make use of all capacities that are available and not just build upon the more formal government efforts. So the Sendai framework also clearly underlines that DR is an all of society responsibility and not something the government, who may have the lead, but the government shouldn't necessarily work closely with the local NGOs and local community-based initiatives. And then to conclude, I just want to underline that we do not only need to focus on the big events with a high number of fatalities, which receive a lot of media attention and also often a lot of resources. But at GNDR, we notice that there's small-scale disasters which are affecting communities on a daily basis. And these small-scale disasters are often caused by a variety of hazards, natural and man-made, a combination of stresses and shocks, and which are often closely interrelated. So we think that beside all the efforts and attention that goes to the losses created by the big disasters, it's also important to focus on small-scale recurrent events and for the government to also pay attention to that. And we at GNDR have launched the 365 campaign, which on a daily basis highlights and documents a disaster. So every day on our website, we actually, from all over the world, I think we're now in 60 or 70 countries, we identify a small-scale disaster which does not get the necessary media attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruno. We've now, I don't know, Jamie or Ahmad, if you wanted to make any comments before we move into the Q&A, given that Dr. Pokral wasn't able to join us. Are there any comments that you'd like to make?
Yeah, I mean, I'd maybe just make a couple, and maybe Ahmad could do some more. I mean, I think that, I mean, Elizabeth's point about the conflict sensitivity, I do believe that we have in this country team here a very well-honed and well-plugged-in understanding of what's going on. In fact, during the earthquake, we provided every new arrival the opportunity to come to a daily briefing of conflict sensitivity, the political situation, the cultural sensitivity that goes on here. So I would say that we're very well aware of it, and we try to offer that service to as many people we can. We have a regular ongoing political discourse. We very much engage with the whole inclusion debate, and we try to make sure the programs and projects we have, not just for the earthquake, but in general, are very conflict sensitive and sensitive to cultural challenges. The UNDAF, which is this the development framework for the UN, in fact has identified 19 vulnerable groups across a very large swathe. So it's very much part of the culture. Whether it's successful is another issue all the time, but it's something we strive for. And maybe the point Bruno made about, the attitude change since the earthquake, I'm not quite sure about that. I think we'd have to wait and see before we can say there's been a significant change in the way people view vulnerabilities in communities and the way they identify and target beneficiaries. But maybe Ahmad's got anything to add?
Well, thank you very much. That was very good discussion, in fact, Bruno and Elizabeth. What I see is that, well, I don't have evidence, and I have not done any survey, but I and my institution firmly believe that the extended period of conflict that we had in Nepal is the direct result of the 1988 earthquake, which in 20 seconds gulped down the entire national budget for 1 year, and then the 1993 floods in south central Nepal. These two events and their shocks were not managed, and I personally believe that there is a strong linkage between that. Now, the second point I want to say that, thank you, Bruno, for talking about these small-scale disasters. At the present level of things or business, they are in Nepal or in many developing countries. Without the community-based approach, these smaller events cannot be managed. There is no instrument to address that properly. And we had done the survey in 14 countries or in several countries regarding what does it mean. For Nepal, the small-scale disasters are much more impactful than the individual events, the large one that of the type that we had in April this year. So that there lies the importance of the community-based, and that is, most of the works of NSET, I again emphasize that we are based on this community-based approach. Basically, it is the trust and the confidence, these two things that John, you have highlighted in your book also, the trust and the confidence. These two are the key points for us for our work in CBDRM across the country.
Thank you very much, Jamie and Ahmad. I'd now like to open the floor for questions and comments from the audiences, both here in the room and online. I'm first going to take 3 or 4 questions from people in the room, and then I'll move in the next round to our online audience. If you could identify yourself and if you have any organizational affiliation, and also make your question or comment brief and to the point, we'd appreciate it. Any questions or comments?